I'm very honored to be the first speaker of this conference. And when I gave the title, which was Can Metaphysics Help Save the Planet, then I decided to give also to propose also a subtitle, because given the current state of the world, it would have been better to be a little more precise. So my book is an attempt of a defense of ecological restoration. Okay. And when I decided what to speak about today, I didn't know whether to present something that was very somehow solid, already published, etc., etc. And of course I decided, no, let's do something new. Okay, it's not entirely new. There are some parts that have been already presented and discussed in some seminars, etc. Some parts have been already published, but the entire project, so to speak, which is quite big, is this is the first time that I'm gonna present it, so I'm taking advantage of your presence here for having thorough feedback. And so some parts are quite solid, I hope. Some others are not. Okay, so be patient and let's see. Okay, what are my aims? Okay, I have mainly two aims. The first one is a metaphysical aim. That is that I want to argue for both the possibility and usefulness of metaphysics of conservation science. That is, I would like to somehow persuade you that metaphysics can give some meaningful contribution to conservation science. I am going to explain what conservation science is. Okay. And the second aim, which is connected with this one, is that of defending the so-called restoration thesis, which is the idea that a place can be restored to its prior status without any without a loss of value. Okay? And more broadly speaking, I would like to defend restoration ecology and ecological restoration. Restoration ecology is the science, so to speak. It is an applied science. So you have ecology, which is a science, okay, the theoretical science. And then you have applied ecology, and restoration ecology is a part of applied ecology. And then you have ecological restoration, which is what restoration ecology does. Okay, this is more or less. Maybe I'm saying things that you already know. I have no idea, but I prefer to. Okay, so let's start with my first aim, which is try to persuade you that metaphysics of conservation science is a meaningful endeavor. There is a precondition that I'd like you to somehow satisfy. That is, I will ask you to question claims like the following. That is, metaphysics, insofar as it is concerned with the natural world, can do no better than to reflect on physics. Physical theories provide us with the best handle we have on what there is. Okay, this is in the preface of modern book. And on the contrary, I will ask you to consider the possibility that claims as the following are true. Not only are biological systems too complex to admit of simple reductionism, they are too diverse to admit of universal laws. Okay? And this is Fukushima when he reviewed the book by Ernst Mayr, The Growth of Biological Law. Okay? So I'm not asking you to take a position, I'm just asking you to be open, so to speak, and towards a non-reductionist position. So my idea is that metaphysics can be concerned with the natural world and reflect on biological and ecological systems. Okay, so this is, so to speak, the precondition. I think it's not too much to ask. And then we will proceed by step. Okay, so first step, metaphysics of biology. Metaphysics of biology is already quite known, okay? Even though it is a recent field, so to speak. Philosophy of biology is a relatively recent science compared to the other ones, okay? Philosophy of biology is even more recent, and of course, metaphysics of biology is more recent than philosophy of biology. And I'm following here a characterization that Vanessa Trevino gave in an article of 2022 of metaphysics of biology. And Vanessa Trevino distinguished two ways in which you can do metaphysics of biology. The first one is metaphysics for biology. Okay? In this case, metaphysics is used to clarify a biological concept. Okay? And for instance, think about all the debate in the philosophy of biology towards around the concept of fitness. Okay? As you know, fitness has been accused of being fitness is a central notion within the evolutionary theory, but it has been accused of being a circular concept. Okay? So when an organism is fitter than another one, when it leaves more progeny, when is it that an organism leaves more progeny? Yeah, when it is fitter than the other. Okay? So metaphysical concepts have been used by authors like Robert Brandon or Alex Rosenberg to clarify the concept of fitness. Metaphysical concepts such as supervenience and dispositions, and so on and so forth. The other way of doing metaphysics of biology is doing metaphysics in biology. In this case, you make explicit and clarify, or make more precise, the metaphysical commitment of biological disciplines and theories. Okay? And here you can think about some works by Thomas Reagan, for instance, who looked at the theories and also the practices of two different fields of biology, which are systematics and evolutionary biology. Okay? And looking at those, you can argue that the metaphysical commitment of the two kinds of practitioners when they speak of species are different. Okay? So in one case, they are referring to the result of the evolutionary process. In the other case, they are speaking of the ongoing evolutionary process, that is the lineage. Okay? Now, what Trevino precised is that the two kinds of doing metaphysics of biology are not two different endeavors, they are just two ways of the emphasis is put on different things. So in the first case, the emphasis is placed on the metaphysical theories and concepts that are employed. In the second case, the emphasis is placed on biological phenomena, theories, and practice. Okay. Now, I think that the same characterization can be useful for characterize a metaphysics for conservation science. Okay, but before doing that, we have the second step, which is what are conservation science. Now, conservation science is a multidisciplinary field, so there are a lot of sciences and disciplines that belong to conservation science as a label, and I won't provide a definition because the definition is part of an ongoing debate. Okay, but there are some characteristics that all conservation sciences share. The first one is that they are recent sciences. Because they started to being institutionalized around the middle of the 80s, more or less. And they have been called the crisis discipline because they started to be institutionalized once that the awareness towards the ecological crisis started to increase. Crisis means that they often have to act without having all the relevant knowledge. Okay, think about when you have to save an endangered species. Okay, if you wait to have all the relevant knowledge, yeah, too late. Okay, they are applied sciences. Okay, they have a goal, they have a name. That is, they are mission oriented. All this means that conservation sciences, that for conservation sciences are not very free. Okay. Can be bad, can be good. I'm not going to discuss it, but we will see that that description and values intertwine a lot. Okay. So this is what characterizes conservation science as a whole, and I'm going to speak of one conservation science, which is restoration ecology. But before that, I'm also going to, let's say, I'm going to define, in this case, the two most popular conservation sciences. The first one is conservation biology. That has been, and these have a specific definition, because conservation biology has been defined by Michael Soulet in the so-called Manifesto of Conservation Biology, an article of 1985. And he wrote that conservation biology is a new stage in the application of science to conservation problem. It addresses the biology of species, communities, and the systems that are perturbed either directly or indirectly by human activities or other agents. Its goal is to provide principles and tools for preserving biological diversity. Restoration ecology is the scientific study of repairing, disturbing ecosystems through human intervention. And it could be thought that somehow restoration ecology could be used in a malicious way. Okay? I'm going to talk a bit about this. It is something like, okay, since I can restore a certain place, why not destroy it? Okay? Because then I can redo it. Okay. But I'm going to argue that the thesis itself, the restoration thesis that I'm going to try to defend, can be distinguished by malicious use of it. Okay. So and so now I'm arriving at the third step. Some examples, in the sense that. As I was saying, we have seen that, metaphysics of biology is somehow an already well-established field. It has been characterized in a certain way by Vanessa Trivigno, and conservation science are a multidisciplinary field emerged quite recently, but which is increasingly important. And now we are going to join the two things. So what I think is that you can do metaphysics of conservation science, and you can do it towards the line. You can do it according to the lines drawn by Vanessa Trivigno. And I think that someone is already doing it, in the sense that you can find some example in the literature, even though, let's say, under disguise, because they are not called as such. They are not called metaphysics of conservation biology, for instance. Okay, this is a biased case because, of course, I'm trying to do that. I together with a colleague of mine, we tried to show that the species problem has implication for species prioritization and conservation. Now, the species problem is a classical topic in metaphysics of biology, and in some words, we have tried to show that when you prioritize a species in order to conserve them, you need to take into account the species problem. And this is, I think, an example of metaphysics for conservation biology. Another example is a recent article by Federica Bocchi, who showed that conservation metrics that are used to measure biodiversity, that are supposed to be neutral, so to speak, actually are not so neutral in the sense that they have a lot of she calls them non-epistemic commitments, but actually some of them can be, in my opinion, characterized as metaphysical commitments, such as, for instance, or metaphysical assumptions, such as, for instance, that they endorse the assumption that of a neat distinction between humans and the environment. A case of metaphysics for restoration ecology is, in my opinion, the theory of individuality, more precisely a theory of weak individuality, put forward by Philippe Lienemann in some works in 2011-2014, in which actually he proposes a theory of individuality and which is suited to the aims of restoration and of ecological restoration and ecological engineering. Ecological engineering is another among the conservation sciences. And finally, I think that an example of metaphysics in restoration ecology would be to address the metaphysical commitments of ecological restoration critics to defend ecological restoration, which is what I'm going to do in the next part of my talk. Is there any question? Okay, let's start with the restoration thesis. Imagine, this is the way in which the thesis has been presented the first time by its critics, one of its critics, okay? And it doesn't work. Yeah, it works. Okay, so imagine that a mining company intends to extract sand from beaches in order to obtain rutile, which is a precious metal. I've never heard of it. I've never heard of before. In order to, so large areas of dunes must be cleared of vegetation, and the dunes themselves must be destroyed. The dunes are normally ecosystems very rich in biodiversity, often they are protected ecosystems. All concerned parties agrees that the area has a value beyond its mere utility. In other words, it is agreed that it would be a negative thing to if the area were drastically altered. So, recognizing this fact, the mining company assures that it will restore the dune area to its original condition after the mineral extraction, arguing that any loss of value is only temporary and that the full value will be indeed restored. Okay, this is probably a malicious use of the thesis. Okay, but there are, I think that, as I was saying, that the thesis should be distinguished by the thesis itself. So I'm going to provide two other examples of the restoration thesis used just for restoration purposes. Okay, in the sense that the restoration thesis apply when a place is already damaged. Okay, and this is an image, of course. And it is the case of Fazenda Bussal, owned by Sebastião Salgado. Okay, so that was the family farm of Salgado, and when he and his wife inherited the farm, that was a cattle ranch. Okay, they decided to reforest the place, so they grown like 4 million seedlings in the nursery of their Instituto de Terra. They planted them, and then in just like 10 years, the Mata Atlantica was restored. Okay. Another case is the restoration of coral reefs. Okay. So in this case, you can, for instance, have an underwater nursery where you grow corals, okay, new corals, and then you can attach corals to reef piece by piece with cement, zip ties, and nails, sort of like way of maintaining coral reef, and it works. Okay, it seems that it works. Okay, so these are two examples, one an imaginary one and the other two real world ones, of the application of the restoration thesis. That is the idea. Here again I'm quoting the critics of the restoration thesis. Okay. It is the idea that the damaged degraded nature environment could be restored to its prior status with no significant loss of value. Okay. Why? Because they are ethicists, they are environmental ethicists, they are interested in them. Okay, so the debate surrounding, and here I'm really putting all the debate in one slide. Okay, the debate has lasted started in 1982, the first article on this topic. Okay, so but in a very nutshell. The thesis has been discussed within philosophy of science, especially philosophy of biology, involving also some biologists, and in that case it has been discussed the first part of the thesis, that is what has been called the principle of historical fidelity. Okay? So the idea that a place can be restored to its original state. Okay. I'm going to speak a little about this. Just because it's going to be useful for my parts constraints. But I'm going to focus on the criticisms that have been raised in the field of environmental ethics, because I want to show that those criticisms, which involve values, etc., actually they are based on some precise metaphysical view that are, in my opinion, questionable. Okay. At present, I think that the debate has reached a sort of stalemate between two fields. On the one hand, there are the defendants of the untrammeled nature, okay, and those are the opponents of the restoration thesis and of restoration ecology in general, and on the other hand, the bad guys who permitted the commodification of the last remnants of pristine nature. Okay. And I hope to solve the stalemate somehow. Okay, so what is the plan for the next part of my talk? I divided the remaining part into two parts. The first one is a part textuals, because I will make explicit and discuss the metaphysical view underlying the criticism raised against ecological restoration. These will help to clarify the metaphysical commitments of restoration ecology and break the stamens in favor of restoration ecology. And I think that this can be classified as metaphysics in restoration ecology. In the second part, which is a part of questions, and this is a very first provisional, etc., very first provisional sketch, I will try to formulate a more precise and scientifically up-to-date restoration thesis. And in this sense, I think this part, I think that can be labeled metaphysics for restoration ecology. Okay, let's start briefly with the principle of historical fidelity, that I said is at the very core of restoration ecology, because traditionally restoration ecology endorsed the principle of historical fidelity. So the the idea that the practice of restoration should attempt to approximate within reasonable bounds some past state of a damaged ecosystem. And the principle of historical fidelity has been criticized, especially by Southern Sarkar, through two main criticisms. The first one is the replacement argument. Okay, so the idea of Sartre is the following. When you look at a past state of the system to restore the system, actually you're not trying to, your true goal is not the past state of the system. It's actually, you're looking at the past because you thought that the past state of the system was more sustainable than the present one. Okay? And so the true goal that you're pursuing is self-sustainability, okay? Or some other goal. So you cannot replace historical fidelity with the true goal that you're pursuing. I think that historical fidelity is, by Sartre, okay, is treated as a goal, but actually you can treat historical fidelity as a method, okay? So you look at a past state of the system because that is a reference. You know that the past state of the system worked, and so you try to reproduce it. So if you look at it as a method and not as a goal, the criticism doesn't work. The second argument is the arbitrariness argument, which is when what past the state of the system exactly you have to choose. Okay? It's like, I don't know, 10 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, the place, the scene. Okay, so here I don't think that the past state is actually chosen in a very arbitrary way because you have both practical constraints and those reasonable bounds Garson is talking about, in the sense that, I don't know, project like the extinction of mammoth, okay, those are not a serious restoration project, okay, those are other kind of stuff. So normally when you look at the past state of the system, you make a reference to a state of the system before of a certain damage that occurred to the system. And then in favor of the principle of historical fidelity, you have that restoration, this is an argument made by Garson, that restoration by definition requires some form of historical fidelity because it is called the restoration ecology, otherwise it would be ecological engineering, for instance. And then, as I was saying before, historical fidelity is a sort of precautionary principle. When you know that state worked, you try to reproduce that state. Of course, this is questionable and has been questioned because of climate change. Things are changing too fast compared to the past, and so a past reliable state of the system could be not reliable in the future, but I'm going to talk about this in the past constraints. Okay, what about, let's now switch to the other field, okay, so the field of environmental ethics. In this case, the criticism focuses on the loss of value, and the idea emerges already from the title of the very first two articles that have been devoted to the issue, that are fake in nature and a big lie. Okay, so the idea of some environmental ethicists is that actually when you restore a natural environment, you're not restoring a natural environment, you are producing more artifacts, because if you touch something which is a natural object, if you intervene as a human being on a natural object, then that object is no more a natural object, it has become an artifact. So making restoration ecology means populating the world of more artifacts rather than more natural objects. In that sense, restoration ecology is a big lie. And these are the kind of argument with their works. So there is fundamental ontological difference between artifacts and natural things. There are different kinds of things. Their value is different because of this ontological difference. Design and purposiveness are the hallmarks of artifacts. Therefore, since restoration produces anthropogenic design of human artifacts, it represents just another manifestation of the human desire of dominating nature. Nature is autonomous, analogous to a human subject, in its ability to develop by means of its internal logic. We humans interrupt the nature development of an area and modify it to meet human goals and ideals. Okay, so this is the kind of criticism that have been raised. As you can see, there is this idea that the value is different because of the ontological difference, that restoration ecology is just another manifestation of the human desire to dominate nature, and that we interact with the nature development to meet the human goals and ideals. However, and these are somehow arguments that have to do with the values. They are axiological arguments. Okay. But they are based on certain metaphysical views that are quite evident according to me. And I try to summarize them into metaphysical commitments. The first one is what I have called the ontological difference commitment. That is the idea that there is a fundamental ontological difference between natural objects and artifacts, and the value is different because of this ontological difference. Now, so they accuse ecological restoration, so they say ecological restoration is wrong because it does not adopt the ontological difference commitment. The second metaphysical commitment is what I call the persistence commitment. So the idea that nature develops and it does it analogous to a human subject. And so ecological restoration is wrong because it does not adopt the persistence commitment. Are these commitments well-founded? Okay, because if they are not, then ecological restoration is not so bad. Let's start with the first one, the ontological difference commitment, that in the last analysis lies in the independence principle. Okay, so the idea that things of kind K exist independently of the mental. That is, it is possible that there are things that are of kind K and that there are non-mental states whatsoever. Okay, this is a formulation provided by Amy Thompson. And the independence principle applies to natural objects while it does not apply to artifacts, making artifacts ontologically deficient. Okay, this is a liberty that by Baker. And I have two arguments that are decisive arguments, but the first one I named the Englishman who went up a hill that came down a mountain argument. I don't know if you have seen the movie. It's a very nice movie. Watch it. So the idea is there are two cartographers that go in a Welsh village because they have to establish whether the mountain of the village, a very beloved mountain by the villagers, is a mountain actually. And they start to measure it, and it seems that it is not a mountain. Okay? And I'm not going to spoil the movie because it is a nice movie, so just watch it. So the idea is that no one would deny that a mountain is a natural object, but the fact that a certain elevated portion of the earth's crust falls under the extension of the term mountain is determined by human conventions, such as, for instance, rising at least 300 meters above the surrounding lands. So IP fails for mountains, which is quite counterintuitive. But mountains is not a natural object. Achille Lazzi makes a similar argument for different purpose in a paper of 2000. The second argument is what I have called the non-human artifacts argument, and here I couldn't resist a sort of National Geographic moment, so sorry. Nest, bird nest, termite mounds, beaver dams, spider nets, and the Japanese pufferfish mandala, that is a nest made by a very small fish. It's something really incredible. Now, these things exist independently of the human mind, of course. Are they natural objects? Yes and no. I mean, Ollin Smith, for instance, in his latest book, devoted to niche construction, he speaks normally of non-human artifacts. Okay? And so, where is that we have to draw the boundary? What is the relevant? What are the relevant natural joints here? Okay. Now let's go back to restoration ecology. So, according to the critics of the restoration thesis, this one is. Okay, this one is an artifact, and that one is a natural object. Okay, because this is a planted forest, the other one has not. But here I fully agree with Elena Baker, who in an article of 2008 wrote, "The mind-independent distinction is theoretically misguided because it used to draw an ontological line in an unilluminating place. Artifacts and natural objects are not a real kind." Here it's me, no more Ruda Baker. Artifacts and natural objects are not. You can reframe what I've been saying until here, I think, using natural kinds. Okay? So the idea is that artifacts and natural objects are not real kinds, but they are rather nominal kinds. So their members share features that we, and this we is a very little one because it is Western people. So it is one species and a part of it. Okay? That we consider distinctive and interesting, though these features may not play a fundamental role in how the world actually functions. And actually, if we look at other species, they don't seem to care much about the natural-artificial distinction. Okay? So, seabirds eat cigarettes, but for anti-parasitic purposes. And customary organisms take advantage of darker patches to settle in the open ocean. So there are new species communities that are forming. Okay, I'm not saying that this is a good. I'm not saying that microplastic or plastic are good, or that. But cigarettes are good also because they are decreasing the fitness of the birds because they are poisonous. But what I am saying is that other organisms do not seem to care much about the distinction, which is actually very well entrenched in our conceptual system. We divide the world in natural objects and artifacts. But maybe the distinction is not so fundamental. Okay. And this is a correct issue overgrowing a 3D frame structure resembling a colony of corals. Okay, I'm going. So, in the last analysis, the question has to do with the place of human being in nature, and this is Tansley, who is the inventor of the concept of the system. Okay, and he wrote, "Is man part of nature or not? Regarded as an exceptionally powerful biotic factor which increasingly upsets the equilibrium of pre-existing ecosystems and eventually destroys them, at the same time forming new ones of very different nature, human activity finds its proper place in ecology." So according to him, human being is part of the ecosystems. Okay? When you do ecology, you look at all the species, you look at the species community altogether. Let's switch to the persistence commitment, which is, if you recall, the idea that nature develops, and it does it analogous to a human subject. Now, put in this way, it doesn't make sense. Okay, it doesn't make sense because a human subject, because nature is not really something that develops individuals and the organisms develop. Okay. Human subjects are very peculiar kind of organism. Okay? They are not representative of natural development. They are just they are species of vertebrates that develop in a very specific way. So we need to do two preliminary steps. One is to reformulate the persistence condition to make it reasonable and consistent with the restoration ecology. So we can replace, I suggest to replace a human subject with an individual organism, it's a bit more wide, and to replace nature with communities or ecosystem. In this way, the persistent commitment becomes compatible with ecology, restoration ecology. And as I was saying, I think that nature is not an individual, so it doesn't develop communities or ecosystems. On the contrary, can be thought of as individuals, so maybe weak individuals, but they can be counted, etc., etc. Then you can be nominalist towards ecosystems, but if you do restoration ecology, maybe you're not. And ecosystems are actually the main target of ecological restoration. And so we have revised persistence commitment that I labeled persistent committed eco, according to which ecosystems and communities or communities develop analogous to individual organisms. Okay. Does this commitment make sense? Yeah. Sort of, in the sense that the closest position that you can find in the literature to this idea is Clement's theory of ecological succession, which is at the very first paradigm, so to call it, is the paradigm of equilibrium in ecology. Okay? And according to him, the developmental study of vegetation necessarily rests upon the assumption that the unit or climax formation is an organic entity. As an organism, the formation arises, grows, matures, and dies. The life history of a formation is a complex but definite process, comparable in its chief features with the life history of an individual plant. So according to Clements, vegetal communities, ecology started with vegetal communities. Okay? The concept of ecosystem is of 1935. Vegetal communities tend to reach and maintain a state of equilibrium, the climax, okay, which is the optimal state of the system, considered the climate in which the ecosystem, the community live. Through a progression of developmental stages. If a disturbance occurs, the system tends to get back in track. And this is a very progress-oriented, deterministic, simple pathways of change. Okay? So it has been accused of being an Aristotelian way of looking at communities because it has some similarities with the theory of the natural state of Aristotle. Now, according to this paradigm, this idea of how vegetal communities develop, that is as superorganisms, so to speak. So developmental stages, predetermined developmental stages, and then a state of maturity, so to speak, the climax, in which the system tends to stay, okay, indefinitely. Has been questioned at the very beginning. So it became the paradigm of ecology, but it has been questioned already by Harry Gleason, according to whom the system doesn't follow a trajectory, and his theory is an individualistic one. That is, that each individual species happen to be in the same place because of contingent reasons, okay? Because they are in too close island, or because I don't know. So they happen to be there for chance, not, and then they interact, okay? So they don't work together as a whole. There are some interactions, but those interactions depend on the fact that chance brought those species in that place. So, and Gleason considered Clement's view without empirical foundation. Okay, today, sorry, I'm going a bit faster, but I'm also going towards the conclusion, so be patient. Today, at least according to Pickett and Candenasso, vegetation development is in no sense the same thing as the growth, maturation, and senescence of an individual organism. So we have two historical paradigms. The history of ecology, ecology has not decided that there's no right or wrong paradigm, okay? But let's say that a Clementian view in a stronger, understood in a stronger sense, that is that the idea that communities are superorganisms, that is not hold anymore, okay? But I will suggest that a pluralistic view can do the job. So the persistence commitment, even in its ecological version, is at odds with what is known about communities. So if we look at the relevant science and if we look at metaphysics, the two metaphysical commitments of the criticism of the restoration thesis doesn't seem so compelling. And now I'm going to speak very briefly. Okay, this is my first postulance. As I was saying, it's a very first and provisional sketch, but I wanted to present it anyway, and maybe having your feedback. That is built, of course, on the results of the past postulance. Now, critics of restoration ecology accuse it of endorsing the principle of historical fidelity, but I try to show that critics can be rebutted. The principle remains valid, but it shall be thought of as a method, as I explained, rather than an end, rather than a goal, and it shall be updated, in my opinion, mainly because of climate change and because of the pluralistic view of the communities. In the sense that maybe for some kind of communities, a previous state as a reference state is okay, but if communities develop if communities change through time in a different way, maybe it doesn't work. The second result, the criticism towards ecological restoration, was that they don't care about the nature-artificial distinction. And I try to show that the distinction might not be well-founded and might bear little ontological relevance. So it exists, but I think it is a nominal kind. What are them? But then we have to answer what are the relevant distinctions. There is what natural joints is restoration ecology and ecological restoration committed. So if it is not artificial natural distinction, what are the joints? And here I have some idea. In the sense that if you look at restoration ecology, the properties that they found relevant are things like degraded functional, with low integrity, with high integrity, unhealthy, healthy, lowly resilient, highly resilient, and then I would add also perceived as high artificial and perceived as highly natural. Because actually you find that a lot of reference to the word nature, restoring nature, etc., etc. But the idea is more that it is more an instrumental use of the word, okay? Because people like nature. But I think that this idea that nature, even though it is not a natural joint, can be included for, let's say, in a pragmatic way. Okay? So the important thing here is that if you have a series of states, a series of properties, so to speak, states that are undesirable and others that are desirable. Okay? And this will allow us to, and this is due to the fact that all these concepts that are used in restoration ecology have both a descriptive and an evaluative content. They are thick concepts, if we will now. So these are the joints that interest us. And then critics of restoration ecology accuse restoration ecology of disrupting the organism-like development of ecosystems. Now, I try to show that an organism view of communities and ecosystems is untenable as such. So the question becomes, how do communities' ecosystems change through time? That is, what persistence commitment is endorsed by restoration ecology and ecological restoration. Okay? And here, and notice that the two might be not aligned, because the ecology, restoration ecology and ecological restoration can be not aligned. Okay, because theories and practice not always goes in the same direction, in the same way. So, how do ecosystem or communities persist? Let's say the fight against Gleason has not solved so much, because data remain inconclusive. Suggesting a pluralism of persistence model. For instance, there are ecological concepts that seems to give reason to claims, like trophic cascades or the competitive exclusion principle, that treat communities and ecosystems. That seem, in that case, communities or ecosystems seem actually to work as integrated wholes. Okay. Other phenomena like metapopulations or optimal conditions seems to give a reason to Gleason. So what seems to me, I find myself on the same side of J. Odenbo, who suggested that maybe we have at least three kinds of communities. We have Clemensian communities that, according to him, are individuals, superorganisms, and then some other communities are Gleasonian communities, so they are aggregates. Some others are Atchinsonian communities, they are whole. So, of course, if different kinds of entities persist through time in different ways, so we need to take into account which kind of entity we have to do. Okay, so this is the very last slide, and I promised an attempt to revise the restoration thesis that was the idea that a damaged or degraded nature environment could be restored to its prior status with no significant loss of value. That was the target of the critics of environmental ethics in the following way. Restoration thesis is the idea that an ecosystem or community can be restored to a specified desirable state. Recall the two columns, desirable and undesirable state. So I can restore it to a specified desirable state. And in this way I can avoid the reference to the significant loss of value present in the original version, because the value is included there in the desirable state. Using as a reference an alternative state of the system selected based on the relevant empirical and metaphysical constraint, and this is the revision of the principle of historical fidelity. Okay, so that means that the reference state has not necessarily to be in the past. It has to be an alternative state. Okay, why? Because of the type of the community and because of the empirical constraints, such as the kind of place, the kind of models that you have. The kind of projections that you have about the future of that place. So, as I was saying, the reference to the values are embedded in the desirable state. Of course, what the desirable state is has to be specified by any project. Okay? And when a historical state is not the optimal reference model, a current state, for instance, one that is spatially proximate and not degraded, for instance, in the case of in the Salgado case, okay, that was the reference state. It was not past. Yeah, of course, it was before the cattle ranch, but what they used were plans of an actual system, so the proximate system, okay, or a projected future state. That is a state that reflects the anticipated consequences of climate change. Okay. In that case, a past state can have a function again, because some of the future states that we are able to, not myself, okay, but that climate scientists are able to model, have a lot to do with past state of the systems, like a Pleistocene state of the system, what we can imagine. So, an alternative state that can be used. So this is my proposal, and this is, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Questions? Finger from Paula. Stephen, please give your half.
Oh,
It is great.
okay. Thank you. That was very illuminating. I just wanted to ask you wanted to suggest that the debate of the restoration thesis is based on some metaphysical considerations, but you also suggested that ecology is not a value-free science. So I wonder. You also said that ecology is not a value-free science. So I wanted to ask whether you thought it would be acceptable to you to also point to a difference between proponents and opponents of the restoration thesis based on a difference in the attitudes toward value. I mean, it often seems like a certain kind of ecologist thinks that wilderness has value in itself, whereas others say, well, no, valuing is something that we do. Right? It's for something to have value, it has to have value given to it by us. So I was wondering if the metaphysical difference rests on a deeper difference concerning the nature of value.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Absolutely. Okay. I don't think that ecology is a value, they are very cognitive science. I hope but restoration ecology is applied, every applied science. Actually, for conservation science, often the analogy with medicine is used because they work in a scenario. Now, and I quite agree with you in the sense that I think that, but I quite agree with you in the sense that, what do you want to defend, so to speak? Okay, wilderness or some other managed nature. Okay, the idea, okay, there are two things to say here. First, because the concept of wilderness is very controversial. Okay, and second, because how do I protect the wilderness? Okay, with the so-called Yellowstone model or fence model. Okay, so I put boundaries, okay, and that portion, the piece of nature, becomes unavailable for human beings unless they're rich. So in that case, I mean, those boundaries are made by us. Right? So in a way, we are interacting. We are disturbing the naturalness, the authenticity of the place, right? So once you have to translate in actions, okay, your values, and that becomes complicated, in my opinion. Okay? So I try to do the other, in a way, the other. I try to thought in the other way around. Okay? So what do we know about the world? Okay? Where do we have to look at science, at the relevant sciences and the metaphysics? Okay? What do we know? Are we convinced about this distinction? Okay? Yeah, I'm not. Okay? And I have to show that maybe you have to question the distinction. And of course, you have to put some constraints. For instance, the malicious use of the physics. Okay, but that is a task for politics, for instance. Okay? So you have to when you put in place a restoration project, you have to be sure that it is not used in a malicious way. Okay? So that is what I try to do. I don't know if I answered satisfactory to your question. It was a big one.
Is it a follow-up or another? Okay, so Fabrice next.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the talk. I have questions. At some point, it seemed that some people in the debate conflated two distinctions. So one is the distinction between mind independence and mind independence. The other one is between natural and or artificial or actual. And it seems to me that, so first of all, the distinctions are on the face of it quite distinct. And perhaps more importantly, the first distinction might think does make interpretative sense, at least insofar as the notion of the natural makes sense. Whereas you could be at the same time skeptical about the second distinction, saying, well, there's no such thing as nature, or as nature as we tend to propose it to humanities. So what do you think about the status?
Okay. I probably done that. I thought it made sense, but maybe it doesn't. In the sense, one is you're saying that the independence and the natural objects artifacts distinction cannot have not to be conflated. Okay, but if how do you defend how do you ground the natural object artifact distinction if you're not endorsing an independence principle?
So I am thinking.
It's a genuine question. Mine is a genuine question.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the national distinction. So it's not really, trying to.
Because I don't find a way to distinguish between artifacts and how we consider it. How we consider them. When we speak of artifacts, we think that artifacts are dependent on human minds. Then we can say, okay, it is intention, it is design, it is intention is a function. Okay, but all of these, I think, can be reduced to mind dependence. Human mind dependence. But it seems to me that, like the case of non-human artifacts, those kind of objects are not dependent on human minds, so maybe are dependent on other organism minds or other mind-like systems. Okay. So I don't know, it works to me. I'm not sure that I understand why they're not convinced.
So I guess my worry was about the distinction between what's mind independence when the mind is the human mind and it's mind independence and the mind is not human. So that's a distinction that's
so you wouldn't call the non-human mind-dependent artifacts, so you wouldn't call them artifacts, for instance.
Those are lots.
Like nests and stuff like that wouldn't be artifacts.
In an extended sense of artifacts, yes.
Okay. I think we'll go and discuss it. Because I know that it is that part is probably the one that I'm most concerned about, in the sense that I think that the distinction natural objects and artifacts is so entrenched in our mind that it's difficult to think without using it. Okay? Maybe it is an evolutionary based distinction, because of course what we have done is safer for us rather than things that have been done by other organisms. Okay, so maybe it is so unintelligent for that reason. But we continue to find it very species relative and very unfortunate species relative, because there are some cultures that do not have the distinction, for example. They don't have the word nature, they don't have. So they just cut, they do different, they articulate the word in a different ways. If so, then it is not so very fundamental. And in the last analysis, I think that there is at least one fundamental distinction between, which is the distinction between living beings and not living beings, okay? And not living stuff. Okay? That I think is fundamental. But about nature, that we check, okay? But we will discuss. Thank you very much.
Next one is Lugano.
Yeah, thanks. This was great. So I was wondering whether you can elaborate a bit more on the distinction that you made between the past state as a goal and past state as a method. Because so in a sense, when you presented the past conference again, for a moment I thought like, okay, so that what you're saying is that restoration shines here a bit of a misnomer, because the aim is not to restore the past. But then I also thought, like, well, yeah, but that's something still that you restore, is something with value. So you're in a situation that was value, then something happened, or because human intervened, and this system lost its value, and now we want to restore value, which might be not the original state, but still something that it's like the past insofar as the past had value, and now we think it's less value. So I was wondering whether, first of all, if this interpretation of restoration is correct, and what is actually the difference then with the methodology. So why the past is still part of the methodology, since it seems that, in a sense, it's not really relevant any longer.
Okay. The difference between having a past state as a goal and as a method is, I think, is that you don't want to actually rebuild a past state, okay? Where a past state is defined by some variables, and of course you don't bring back the past state, right? But you can achieve it. You can fix. You can set some variables, and give some value to the variables, and then try to reproduce a similar state. Okay. Okay. According to some, you do that because of sort of emotional reasons. Okay. For instance, an argument that is involved is nostalgia. Okay, we have this nostalgia towards imaginary, idealized past, and so on and so forth, and we try to bring it back, and we attribute this value to that past insofar as a past. Okay? And this is what Sartre was criticizing, for instance. And this is what I would call historical fidelity as a whole. Right? So I love that past state because I think that past state is valuable, yeah, because I like it at the end of it. Okay. But then you can consider it as a method in the sense that if you want to restore a certain value, a certain property, which is, as I was saying, is both descriptive and normative, okay? So that is the value that I wanna, that my system has. Okay? I want a system who has a higher biodiversity than it has in the actual state. Okay? I want to improve the biodiversity of that system. How can I do that? I know that the past state of the system had a higher biodiversity. Okay? So I try to reproduce the past state because it's safer than create an entirely new ecosystem. And also because you have to work with what you have, so with the material stuff that you have, right? So you have a certain kind of vegetation, animals, and so forth. Okay. But in that sense, you're not reproducing the past state by itself. You're using the past state as a template to produce a new state of the system because you want to restore the system under a certain desirable state. And here I'm thinking that maybe Sarah was right about the replacement criticism, so I'm going to stop to talk about it. I don't want to criticize myself.
So you both have a question and a follow-up.
My question.
Okay. Anyway, it's you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Very interesting presentation, and I love your optimistic stance on this. Obviously, I have worries. I'm already have worries as well. So I changed my question in a follow-up because I have some doubts very similar to Giuliano's. This idea of restoration, talking about restoration, may be a bit tricky because restoration is returning to a past state. And actually, my worry is that it seems to me that you wrote preferred state, the privileged state, something like that. I don't remember. Desirable state, maybe. Okay. And the concept of state is like synchronic. I mean, it is a state, but actually every state is product of a history, of an evolution. And so that's the problem, probably, because if we want to restate the state, we cannot redo the history that produced that state at the beginning. Okay, so if we want to recreate an ecosystem, that ecosystem was produced by a long history, we cannot do that, right? So we can reproduce the state, maybe, I don't know, reintroducing species that are now extinct, that we know that inhabit that territory in the past. But actually this history that originally produced that state is a history of interactions between different organisms, between biotic and abiotic variables. We cannot control that. So I think that this is the big problem, and this is because, it's rather than a restoration, maybe it's a kind of reconstruction of something similar. And maybe I think that you may work on this, I don't know, you can discuss this concept of restoration, because I think that maybe some criticism about this idea depends on the fact that we are talking about restoration, but maybe we have in mind something a bit different rather than just restoration.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I've discussed a lot of stuff. Yes, so you interrupted the evolutionary history of the place. First, it depends in the sense that if certain changes in the system can be considered as interruptions, so to speak. For instance, if a system is completely destroyed, okay? So what do you do in that case? This is tricky in the sense that the system will start again. Okay? Maybe it's not the previous one. Maybe it's one that was before the previous one. Okay? But there is a degree of arbitrariness here, because think about the Salgado example. Okay? There was another Atlantica. Okay? Then there is the cotton farm, and then there is another Atlantica again. The story of the place. Okay? In order to answer, you need to set a spatial and a temporal scale, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. Okay? So according to certain spatial and temporal scales, a system can be interrupted or not. Okay? Once that you have decided that, once that you have decided which temporal scale you're working, temporal and spatial scale you're working, then you can decide the kind of restoration that you can apply. Concerning the thermal restoration ecology, okay. Yes, that is a topic that is debated. It has been named by Gaston, who defends the principle of historical fidelity, as a conceptual argument towards restoration ecology. It is, okay, since it is called restoration, okay, it must make reference to us system, as system. I'm not sure about that. In the sense that, for instance, when the term restoration is used, according to me, not only according to me, in analogy with art, okay, with work of art. So when you restore a work of art, you don't always bring it back to the previous state. It depends on the restoration school. Okay? For instance, you can choose between pale color, which is more similar to the one that has been produced through time, or you can choose a brilliant color, which is probably what you think was at the beginning. Okay? But it depends on the school. So that's what I can say. I have
Sorry, what's the follow-up on that? Okay. Yes.
Thank you for the paper. So, as I understand the original sort of criticism was basically because the restoration thesis is a model thing. It's possible that we can do something. And they were criticizing that this is impossible, and it's also this impossibility lies in a metaphysical distinction between archetypes and natural kinds or the other. Now, although we do see that, okay, these are not good enough differences, where is the source of the possibility of that we can achieve such states? So, and obviously there are some states which we know we can't achieve, like we cannot bring back certain extinct species, for example. So, is there a deep metaphysical distinction between the kinds of states which we can achieve and we can't achieve?
Thank you for the question. I don't know. I have to think about that. I'm not sure. I think that there are empirical constraints. In the sense that, of course, in a certain place you cannot build an entirely different kind of system that was present in that place. Metaphysical constraints, probably so, I think, because at least you need to look at them in the sense that, for instance, if you think that there are different kinds of ecosystems, okay, or different kinds of communities. I didn't talk about the different kinds of ecosystems, but of course you can distinguish also different kinds of ecosystems behaving in different ways, or communities that behave in different ways. In that case, I would say that is a metaphysical constraint, but the boundary between metaphysics and metaphysical and empirical constraints is quite blurry, I think, right? Yeah, I would say so. Thank you very much.
Is that follow-up? Okay, so Elena.
So, thanks for the talk. I was actually thinking back to a case you described at the beginning, namely the case of the sand dunes environment. And I was wondering what's your final take on this case. So, as long as the final state is desirable, then there is no loss of value, probably. Maybe there are other reasons not to accept the experiment of the explication of this kind of environment. But as long as the argument based on the artificial natural distinction is concerned, would actually take it. I mean, this was not a good reason to.
It's a beautiful question. Okay, in that case, I I think that and this is the reason why I am changing the formulation. No significant loss of value. It depends on value, right? So if you restore a system of a specified desirable state, of course you are gaining value, right? So you're not losing any value. The data for the sender is the restored news is a tricky one, in my opinion, and it is for that reason that I added a different. It is in a way, it's a biased one because when I do answer, that is not true. That you're losing some value. Okay. Okay, and then there when I was thinking about it, okay, I tried to put myself in the in the situation. Okay, so for instance, I am there is a village, okay, and there is some the mining activity could really improve the economy of the village. Well, the country not extracting reliable. What is the value that you lose if you do that operation? If it is well done, okay, you have to consider all the variables, I think. So you cannot give an answer by itself. Okay? You have to consider what is the kind of system that you are intervening on. Okay? For instance, if it is the last remnant system of a certain kind, maybe don't do it. Okay? But again, it's our choice in the sense that it is us that attribute a value to rarity, for instance. Okay? So what I think is that you need to be clear about the value that you are speaking about. Because saying that a place has a value by itself, that is biased. Because for instance, in the case of the mining, the value by itself was naturalness. Okay? Naturalness understood as not without human interference, right? So if you interfere, naturalness is lost. Okay, yeah, by definition, right? And maybe that the understand that we perceive as pristine wasn't pristine at all, because maybe 1,000 years ago it was inhabited and it was an entirely different kind of system. So what I think is that you have to clarify. You need to know the story of the place, for instance, to see whether there is a pristine place. You don't know. You really don't know. Okay? And again, it is a question of scale. It depends on which temporal scale you choose. Maybe a place by place approach would be the most honest one, I think. I know that it is not a satisfactory answer.
So we have to follow-up to prove your point. Can I please, because I think the badge is touching the microphone.
No, sorry.
Right. So we have two follow-ups, so I ask you to be very quick because we have also two questions. Alessandro?
Thank you. So quick follow-up on the gym scenario. So imagine that instead of a gym, there is a cathedral. And so, we have exactly the same kind of scenario. Is it okay to just tear down the cathedral, get the mineral, and then with some stones put them back in the same shape and size? And obviously, that would be a dilemma. So, are we interested in the original cathedral or just in the type? And so, I wonder how much of your arguments are actually about the distinction type versus token, as opposed to something specific about nature. So can you generalize your argument?
Look, I think, may I answer? Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I didn't know whether I had to wait for the second question.
No.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. That is interesting, and I don't think I needed the analogy with the cathedral, because the point is whether you, of course, the point is whether you want to reproduce an ecosystem of the same kind, right, or the same type. If you can speak of types for ecosystems, I'm not sure of that. In the sense, of course, ecosystems are individuals, okay? But again, you can group them, like if there is a forest and I do a lake, that is not restoration. Okay. And it is, I think it's a sort of taken for granted the idea that you are working on an ecosystem of the same kind when you do restoration. So if does it has the same value? I don't know that, but the point is also that when you restore a system, it is because the system has been damaged. That is one of the preconditions of restoration, and which is against the use of malicious, which is against a malicious use of the restoration methods. You restore a system if it has been damaged by human beings or by other activities. Okay. So in that case, you work on systems of the same kind. But thank you. I'm going to think about it.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was great. My question is related to the previous question. I was wondering, because many aspects of the discussion is about values, and we want to restore something because we value someone. And you write here the desirable state, but I am just wondering from a more economist-oriented perspective whether the desirable state also includes, for instance, the cost of restoration. Right? When we want to restore something, we want to move resources from somewhere to restoration. So I am wondering if only discussion about values, there is some representation of the cost of restoration, and whether the desirable state also includes cost of restoration.
Absolutely, thank you very much. Yes, in the sense that the answer is easy here. Yes, when you have to do both the restoration projects and also projects for biodiversity conservation, monetary constraints are, of course, one of the first things. So you have constraints in that sense. And if you think about what I was saying about choosing the historical state or the future state or the permanent state, etc., the resource constraints also help you in choosing which state that is better to try to achieve. Yes.
So we have 3 minutes, but because it's some delays, good? Sure. Okay, so we have one more question. And again, I ask you to keep it quick.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. Yeah. I was thinking about the political outcome of the change in definition that you're suggesting. It seems to me like the original restoration thesis seemed very alarming to me and concerning, because it seemed like it might be wielded by people who said, "Oh, we can just, put it back to the way it was," and that wasn't so much a problem. It did seem alarming to me for metaphysical reasons, because of the ontological criticisms that you were debating, but just because we just don't really know how it was. We don't have we're limited beings, and we don't really know how nature works at the most intricate levels. And whenever we try to redo something or think we can sort of shape nature in some way, we kind of get things wrong, and biodiversity live out in the way that we hoped it would or something. So this is maybe just a question about whether you think that the revision that you've suggested carries with it that sort of concern that we just don't know how to. Okay, let me just try and rephrase it. That's why I'm not supposed to be quick. The first one has this idea that we can restore it to a prior status, because in some sense we know what that prior status is. Whereas the rephrasing has it's whatever we specify. And it might be that our specification is very coarse-grained and it just doesn't... Look, like I said I was going to plant some trees up there, I've done it, like, there it is. And I said, but the issue is that we don't really know how it was functioning before, and we can't specify it, and that's the problem with restoration pieces. What do you think of that?
I am not entirely sure that I understood your question, but I tried, and even my answer doesn't fit your question. Okay. So, think of the case of the dunes. Okay. In that case, you have the dunes, which is an ecosystem that works. Okay. Then you mine it, you have a graded system, and you try to bring it back. You know that before the mining part had before. So it's not true that we don't know that past reference system. We have knowledge about the past stable systems.
Well, we know that
I'm sorry, I really am sorry. I want to leave the time. So, Germany in actually